nadie, como dicen los argentinos, nadie le daba bolilla a España. No estaba ni Europa, ni América, estaba muy aislada. Entonces se le ocurrió a este Carrero Blanco decir, y si traemos a Guernica, esto va a ser una explosión cultural, la gente va a venir, etc. Y entonces se les ocurrió que para conseguirlo, nada mejor que a través de la familia de Luis Miguel Dominguín, que era un gran amigo de Picasso, él y su esposa Lucía Bosé, la artista italiana. Pero resulta que cuando quieren intentar esa mediación, ya se habían divorciado y Picasso no quiere saber nada de Luis, sigue de amistad con Lucía, y ella, por más dinero que le pagaban, dijo que no quería vender su amistad por dinero. Así es que no intentaron nada, y cuando se enteró Picasso de todo esto, entonces fue cuando declaró por todos lados: ni el Guernica ni yo iremos a España mientras esté Franco ahí en el gobierno. Incluso después, en 1970, con su abogado, escribió una carta dirigida al MoMA, en la que, entre otras cosas, decía que ese cuadro regresaría a España, ¿sí? Porque desde siempre dijo, este cuadro tiene que estar en España, pero solo cuando las libertades públicas se restablezcan en aquel país. Picasso muere en 1973 a los 91 años, y entonces de nuevo la pregunta, ¿y ahora a quién pertenece el cuadro? ¿Qué hacemos con este cuadro? ¿De quién es? Resulta que Franco muere 2 años después, en el 75, y hay varios implicados en saber a quién pertenece y dónde se va a quedar. Entre ellos estaba el MoMA. Este cuadro estuvo al final 44 años en el MoMA en Nueva York, y 44 años es una amistad muy grande, ¿eh? ¿Quién se desprende de un buen amigo a los 44 años? Así es que ellos intentaban por todos los medios, no, que se quedara allá. Por otro lado estaba el Congreso de Estados Unidos, porque este cuadro era que digamos algo mundial, entonces no podían jugarse con él, tenían que hacer las cosas en el orden debido. Estaban los 6 herederos de Picasso, que en principio no les pertenecía al cuadro, pero tenían derecho de dar su opinión. Por ejemplo, es tradicional, estos herederos pueden protestar si se cambia el apellido, o si se cambia el nombre del cuadro, o si se deteriora, o si no se muestra en un lugar adecuado. Entonces ellos tenían que dar su beneplácito también. Y por fin estaba el gobierno de España, que era el más interesado, pero solo cuando fallece Franco en 75 empiezan las tratativas, pero todavía no había democracia, hasta 2 años después, en el 77, que se elige Adolfo Suárez como primer presidente del gobierno ya democrático, y él nombra una comisión cuyo objetivo es: hay que traer el cuadro a España, no como sea, sino según las normas, ¿sí? Somos muy honrados los españoles. Entonces dijo, hay que traer el cuadro, y se nombra una comisión, la Comisión Guernica, y entonces tenían que demostrar primero la voluntad del pintor. La voluntad de Picasso había sido siempre la de que este cuadro estuviera en España, ¿eh? Ya habíamos visto ahí, eso no había problema. Después las garantías democráticas, había que demostrar que España era una democracia. Y en un momento hubo un poco de dificultad, porque el cuadro regresa en 1981. Justo en febrero de 1981, no sé si se acuerdan, hubo un teniente coronel llamado Antonio Tejero, que con una pistola en mano se presenta en el Congreso. Dice aquí, no, fue terrible aquello, un golpe de Estado que fracasó rotundamente, y entonces demostró que España ya quería ser democracia y que no se podía admitir ya ningún golpe de Estado, ningún dictador. Por ahí estamos bien. Después la factura de 150.000 francos. ¿Y dónde está la factura? Había que buscarla. Entonces manda el gobierno de España a París que investigue. Resulta que, claro, cuando el gobierno republicano es derrotado y viene el nuevo gobierno nacionalista de Franco, el embajador Luis Araquistain se había llevado todos los archivos. Eran suyos, en su época, todo lo que había hecho él en su época se los llevó. Él se había exiliado, era republicano, se había exiliado a Ginebra y allí se había llevado el archivo. Pero ya había fallecido, felizmente se encontró al sucesor, tuvo al principio problemas, pero al final España pudo comprarle todos esos archivos y estaba allí la documentación de que se le había entregado 150.000 francos a Picasso, o sea que no hubo problema en ese sentido. Había que lograr el beneplácito de los herederos, los 6. En esos, Adolfo Suárez personalmente se implicó en ello, escribió una carta a cada uno de ellos, incluso a 3 les habló por teléfono, los convenció de que era el mejor lugar, España, para que el Guernica se quedara. Después la voluntad de los museos, ya hemos dicho el MoMA, y después el español, que por supuesto el Museo del Prado lo iba a recibir con los brazos abiertos, y después quedaba finalmente el Congreso de Estados Unidos. Finalmente, como vemos ahí, el Comité Conjunto de la Cámara y el Senado norteamericanos autorizan la devolución del Guernica a España. Esto se realizó, por supuesto, en Nueva York con todo el sigilo. Por la noche, cuando se logró este acuerdo, por la noche se envolvió, no era fácil descolgar el cuadro, envolverlo, eran 300 kilos de peso, y entonces se eligió hacerlo por la noche, que y por la mañana, bien tempranito, la que era en ese momento directora, presidenta de la MoMA, Blanchette Rockefeller, la esposa de John Rockefeller III, entonces lo entrega a las autoridades españolas, que lo reciben con mucho gusto y despiden, el museo despide con muchas lágrimas y mucha emoción a ese cuadro que dijimos 44 años había acompañado a sus paredes. El Guernica llega a España el 10 de septiembre del 81 en el vuelo Lope de Vega, y como titulaba ese día el diario ABC, Nueva York, España, sin billete de vuelta, felizmente. Lindo también que fue un vuelo normal, había 340 pasajeros, y el comandante de a bordo, cuando ya estaban aterrizando en Madrid, les anuncia: señoras y, como siempre, señoras y señores, bienvenidos a Madrid. Tengo que decirles que han viajado acompañando al Guernica de Picasso. Aquello fue una explosión de alegría en el avión, porque todo el mundo sabía de Picasso, del Guernica. Los únicos que no mostraron mucha alegría, sino una cara de como diciendo eran los guardaespaldas, eran 4 policías que estaban de paisano y que viajaban para proteger si pasaba algo en el avión, y eso sí, sonriendo, dijeron: sí, gracias a nosotros que lo protegimos. Bueno, el avión llega, como vemos, no solo durante el trayecto protegido por militares, sino que al llegar el avión, porque este cuadro representa, regresar del cuadro a España, bueno, nunca había estado antes, pero esta llegada era recordar toda la guerra, era recordar el bombardeo de Guernica, era recordar mucho sufrimiento, era recordar esas 2 Españas enfrentadas. Entonces, por protección, había por todos lados, ya ven ahí, cuando llegó en el vuelo y el traslado, continuamente preocupados para que no evitar cualquier problema. El cuadro se llevó al Casón del Buen Retiro, que era dentro del Museo del Prado, una sección especial que había. Ya ven también ahí cómo se les pone en un cristal blindado completamente, blindado por 2 cosas, para protegerlo, sí, eventual. Recuerden que hubo en el 1974 un pintor iraní, hizo una pintada en rojo acá en Nueva York, en el cuadro, protestando contra la guerra de Vietnam. Entonces tenían miedo de que hubiera algún deterioro, entonces con este blindado se protegía contra posible gente que quiera deteriorar, y también para proteger por el aire, por la humedad, por, en fin, todos esos problemas que un cuadro como este, que ya estaba bastante enfermito, había que protegerlo. Así que 33 expertos desde ese momento se dedicaron completamente a estudiarlo, a analizarlo, y felizmente dicen que hoy día ya está gozando de muy buena salud. Y se trasladó entonces ya definitivamente al Museo Reina Sofía, que acaba de inaugurarse, y ahí está entonces para todo el mundo la piedad y el temor en Picasso, el sentido de la tragedia de Picasso mostrada ahí, y con el deseo de él y de todos nosotros de que ojalá nuestras generaciones futuras vean los desastres de la guerra ahí en un cuadro y que no lo sufran en su cuerpo, en la realidad. Muchas gracias. Damos paso ahora entonces a la segunda parte y tengo el gusto de presentar. Ya he visto que muchos de ustedes los conocen, pero no importa para el que no. Ya saben que tenemos con nosotros al doctor Richard, el director del Museo Magnay. Él es de origen peruano, pero se ha formado aquí en Estados Unidos, ha estado ya en varios museos, sacó el doctorado en Nueva York y justo está celebrando ni siquiera el año, llega 11 meses como director del Museo Magnay. Así es que ahora sí, para él, para que se encuentre en familia, un aplauso por favor.
No sé si me oyen. Muy buenas noches a todos. No es muy fácil.
¿Está bien ahí?
Sí, perfecto. Y creo que tenemos que cambiar el PowerPoint.
Sí,
Perfecto, muchas gracias. Como ustedes saben, lo conocen mejor que yo. Juan Carlos es una de las personas sumamente acogedoras que yo he conocido, entonces no es fácil seguirlo en una presentación. Y quería comenzar con Juan Carlos y con Katy, agradecerlos a los dos por darme esta gran oportunidad de conocer a muchos de ustedes por primera vez, aunque estoy aquí ya 11 meses y 12 libras. Y es un honor hablar frente a ustedes por primera vez sobre mi nuevo trabajo en el Museo Magnay aquí en San Antonio. Mi nombre es Richard Aste, como ven aquí, aunque yo nací en Lima, Perú, con el nombre Ricardo Aste, y cuando me naturalicé con mi familia, mi hermano y yo cambiamos nuestros nombres a parecer más gringos. Y eso era muy común en los 80, yo estaba creciendo en Miami, una ciudad bien parecida a San Antonio, y teníamos mucha presión a simular. Ahora, ya que tengo 47 años y tengo el honor de ser el primer director hispano del Museo Magnay, quiero regresar, gracias. Quiero regresar a hacer el nombre original, a Ricardo. Entonces un día, si conocen a un Ricardo Aste, es la misma persona. También, no sé, algunos conocen a mi madre boliviana que vive ahora en Miami. Ella tiene mucho orgullo de crear 2 hijos que son completamente bilingües. Pero esta noche la voy a decepcionar a mi mamá y a presentar en inglés porque hay muchas citas que quiero presentar en su idioma original, en inglés, hablando de coleccionistas aquí en San Antonio, que eran los fundadores de la colección que tenemos hoy en 2017. Entonces, cuando la conocen, a Rosmaría Aste, dile que la presentación era en español y era divina, por favor. Entonces, ahora cambiamos a inglés para los que entienden español. Esto va a ser una repetición. Good evening, and thank you for giving me and the Magnay Art Museum the opportunity to participate in this important commemoration 80 years later of Picasso's mural painting Guernica. I'm Richard Aste, Ricardo Aste, and many of you may be wondering why I'm even here. Yes, I'm an art historian, and yes, I have a PhD in art history, as Juan Carlos mentioned. It's on Michelangelo. And today, I proudly lead the first modern art museum in Texas, the Magnay, which I show here on the left. The Magnay was founded, many of you know this, but 63 years ago in 1954, quote unquote, for the advancement and enjoyment of modern art. So what do I, or the Magnay, or even San Antonio have to do with the ancient Basque city in Spain? Which is the reason for the title here of my talk, Picasso, Guernica, and San Antonio, a transatlantic reading of a modern master. Now going back to Guernica, it was, as we heard earlier, a defenseless town that was transformed one afternoon in 1937, just over 3 hours during the 10th month of the Spanish Civil War, from the city that I show on the right to this horrific scene. According to the London Times, the following morning on April 27, 1937, Guernica, the most ancient town of the Basques and the center of their cultural tradition, was completely destroyed yesterday afternoon by insurgent air raiders. The bombardment of the open town by German Air Forces acting under the orders of Francisco Franco occupied precisely 3 hours and a quarter, during which a powerful fleet of airplanes consisting of 3 German types did not cease on unloading on the town bombs and incendiary projectiles. The fighter planes, meanwhile, plunged low from above the center of the town to machine gun those of the civil population who had taken refuge in the fields. The whole of Guernica was soon in flames. This is still the London Times reporting the very next morning, with the exception of, as Juan Carlos mentioned, the Casa de Juntas, with its rich archives of the Basque race, where an ancient Basque parliament used to sit. On the right, the famous oak of Guernica, which we also heard from earlier, the dried old stump of 600 years, was also untouched. But even so, that night, 1,645 people perished, and an additional 889 people were injured. Within only 6 days, as you just heard, the 55-year-old Spanish painter Pablo Picasso, then the world's most celebrated living artist, began work on his great mural of that air raid. It was titled Guernica, and it was destined for, as you see here, and as we just heard, the Spanish pavilion at that summer's World's Fair in Paris, which I show on the slide. It was the 10th time that Paris would host the World's Fair. And as we'll see shortly, and this is where the McNay comes in, and even San Antonio, in 1954, on this side of the Atlantic, almost 20 years later, the McNay will open its doors to the public for the first time as that first modern art museum in Texas. And as we'll also soon see, we opened with a major exhibition of, guess who? Picasso, a man who by the age of 30 had revolutionized the art of his time with the invention of Cubism. Among the Picassos on the McNay's wish list to come here to San Antonio for that exhibition was Guernica. And it almost came to San Antonio. I'll tell you more about that in a minute, but I will share with you that Picasso said yes, and even the Museum of Modern Art, or MoMA, had agreed, because they weren't holding it at the time, and everyone was on board except for the fact that our galleries at the McNay were not big enough. The painting, as you saw, is 25 feet in width, and today we could happily accommodate it, but we could not. So more on that in a minute, but now back to Paris, which we're seeing on the screen. The Spanish government, as we heard, was first asked to participate in that year's World's Fair 3 years earlier, 1934, and Jose Gauss, who was the former rector of Madrid University, was appointed the pavilion's commissioner, and we know now the architects were José Luis Sert and Luis Lacasa. And the first stone of the pavilion you see here was set in February of 1937. The design, as I'm showing, was open, it was airy, and it was classical. It was ultimately inspired by a Mediterranean villa. On the wall opposite of Guernica was a blown-up photo of the Spanish poet Federico García Lorca. But I'm not showing it here, it's just outside of the slide. If you know about Lorca at this time, he had just been assassinated the year before at age 38. Some argue for being homosexual, others for his Marxist views. And in between the Picasso and the Lorca, the Garcia Lorca, is the fountain that I show here on the screen by the American sculptor Alexander Calder. And that was designed for channels of mercury to fall directly into a pool. And mercury at the time was a very key Spanish export around the world. But Picasso was the first choice when it came to the pavilion's chief exhibitor. He had recently, as we now know, accepted the position of director of the Prado Museum, and though he had never worked to order, he had never worked on a massive scale, and he had never been so explicitly political, he accepted this opportunity to represent his country. Before the bombing of Guernica, there were rumors that Picasso was actually on the side of Franco in the early days of the war. But by May of 1937, when he was finishing the painting on the screen, he made his political views very clear. He said, quote, "The Spanish struggle is the fight of reaction against the people and against freedom. My whole life as an artist has been nothing more than a continuous struggle against reaction and the death of art." How could anybody think for a moment that I could be in agreement with reaction and death? When the rebellion began, the legally Republican government of Spain appointed me director of the Prado Museum, a post that I immediately accepted. In the panel that I'm working on today, which I call the Guernica, and in all my recent works of art, I clearly express my hatred of the military, because they have sunk Spain into the ocean of pain and death. 8 years later, by the end of World War II, Picasso's transformation into a political artist would be complete. And here's what he said in an interview in Paris, responding to a reporter. What do you think an artist is? An imbecile who only has eyes if he's a painter, or ears if he's a musician, or muscle if he's a boxer? On the contrary, he's at the same time a political being, constantly alive to heart-rending, fiery, and even happy occasions, to which he responds in every way. No painting is not done to decorate apartments. It's an instrument of war, for attack and defense against the enemy. And if you know Picasso, he would soon join the Communist Party. Before we advance here, one more mention about this painting. For inspiration in creating this massive monochromatic anti-war statement, we talked about the dimensions, 11 feet high by 25 feet in width. Picasso looked to the art of the past, and he freely borrowed from various sources. He said, we must pick out what is good for us wherever we can find it. He's often said that to be a good modern artist, you had to be a visual kleptomaniac, looking to ancient Roman sculpture or Baroque painting, or Francisco de Goya, as we talked about earlier, and even the Statue of Liberty in New York City. You'll see the influence here in this painting. So for the figure of the mother on the far left of Guernica, with her head thrown back in agony over the dead child that she holds in her hands, he looked to antiquity and to Christian art, to images in particular of mourning Mary Magdalene's at the foot of the cross of Christ being crucified. Or for the mourning mothers, he looked to representations of the massacre of the innocents, seen here in early Baroque paintings by the Bolognese painter Guido Reni. Or he looked in his own country at the horrific print series, The Disasters of War, by Spain's great romantic painter and master printmaker, Francisco de Goya. Now, in an interview during the Spanish Civil War, Picasso identified the horse, and caballo in particular, in early paintings as a symbol of the people, of suffering humanity. He also talked about the bull, and he said the bull is often a symbol for me of brutality and darkness. And these two forces came together in this painting for the first time in 1934 in this painting of a bullfight. Now, the battle between the bull and the horse preoccupied Picasso throughout his life, and when he was 10, he completed his first surviving drawing of a bullfight. When he moves to Paris in 1900, he stops painting this subject, but it reappears at the end of World War I when he returns to Spain. And by the 1930s, bullfights are scenes of horror. Horror becomes the new standard for Picasso and his art. And this shift, as we heard earlier, may have been inspired by his own personal troubles. As we'll soon see, the 1930s marked the beginning of the end of his marriage to his wife, Olga. He poured his feelings into a series of drawings of embattled horses and bulls and matadors. His then mistress, Marie-Thérèse Walter, appears in this painting in particular on the upper left-hand corner in the form of those three faces in profile with exaggerated classical features. Now I'm just going to focus on three of the women. You've met six, but I will zoom in on three in particular, because before he could begin this masterpiece, Guernica, in 1937, Picasso had to sort out his personal tumultuous affairs. He was then living in the Hotel Bisson in Paris, and he was married to, but separated from, the Russian ballet dancer Olga Koklova, whom he couldn't really divorce even if he wanted to, because he was afraid of losing half of his possessions. That was the law in France at the time. So they actually stayed married, and the only reason that marriage ended was because she lost her life to cancer in 1955. But they did have a son, as we heard earlier. His name is Paul, or Paulo. And at that point, after having a son, their marriage began to deteriorate. 6 years later, Picasso begins an affair with the young woman in the middle, who we heard from. She's 17 years old, Marie-Thérèse Walter. And in 1935, they're discovered by Olga, thanks to one of Olga's friends. Olga's friend also mentioned that they're not only having an affair, but that Marie-Thérèse is now pregnant. And in 1937, Marie-Thérèse, now 2 years later, is living outside of Paris in the countryside in a house owned by Picasso's principal art dealer, Ambroise Vollard. Picasso would visit her and their daughter Maya on the weekends, but during the week he took, as we met, a third lover, Dora Maar. She was living closer to him in Paris in the Latin Quarter. We'll get back to these women in a minute, but before painting his now famous mural, you saw drawings for this. This is an oil painting study for the Guernica, his very famous study for the horse's head. He completed numerous studies for his final masterpiece. In this case, you see the tongue of the horse now converted into a dagger, as if it's protruding from its jaws. And that theme of a tongue like a dagger will come back in the final painting. In total, he created 45 preliminary studies that survive today. Many of them were actually here in San Antonio in 1954 for that May opening exhibition. Now, Picasso painted Guernica, as we heard, in 5 weeks, and the scene ultimately takes place in darkness. The stage is a public square in town enclosed by unidentified buildings, but you can make out some tiled roofs on the upper margin in the back. There's a cast of characters ultimately divided by 2 groups. The first group is 5 active animals and humans, going from left to right: a bull, a wounded horse, and a winged bird. At the bottom, we have a decapitated soldier lying on the ground below, and a woman on the upper right who's leaning out from a window and across the painting toward the middle, extending a lamp to light up the world in the form of truth. The second group focuses on 3 women, almost like a Greek chorus. At the far left, we have again the screaming mother holding her dead child. On the lower right, we have a woman rushing into the composition, and above her on the right, a woman falling inside a house that's collapsing in flames. But what does all this mean? What does the bull mean here? What does it symbolize? And was it a self-portrait? Some art critics actually argue that it was Picasso's escape valve from a reality that was too violent for him to bear. Was the bull here then as a symbol of evil, and by extension was it General Franco? Picasso himself was not helpful when art critics were trying to figure it out. In fact, he disappointed and even angered critics who were desperate to decode the Guernica. So he refused to give them the answer. But ultimately, what you're looking at here is a battle. And the central theme is the opposition between brutality and truth. Picasso violently distorted the bodies of humans and even of animals in a drastic attempt to convey expressions of sheer horror. His goal was indeed to give visible form to an evil in the world that he saw around him, and in the end, influence humanity toward a better tomorrow. So in December, the year that he completed this work, a few months later, he wrote, "I have always believed and still believe the artists who live and work with spiritual values cannot and should not remain indifferent to conflict in which the highest values of humanity and civilization are at stake." Not long after he delivered this painting from his Paris studio, Picasso's mistress, Marie-Thérèse Walter, then living outside the capital, walked into the studio. She walked in and found Picasso up on a ladder and Dora Maar at his feet. And the young 17-year-old girl said, "I have a child by this man. It's my place to be here with him." She said, "You, Dora, can leave right now." And then Dora replied, "I have as much reason as you have to be here. I haven't borne him a child, but I don't see what difference that makes." So Picasso, taking the easy way out, later recounted. He told this story. He said, reliving that moment much later, "Finally, Marie-Thérèse turned to me and said, 'Make up your mind. Which one of us goes?' It was a hard decision for me to make. I like them both, and for different reasons. Marie-Thérèse, because she was sweet and gentle and did whatever I wanted her to do. And Dora, because she was intelligent. I told them that they had to fight it out themselves, so they began to wrestle." Now, both Marie-Thérèse and Dora made their way into this painting in some form or other. Marie-Thérèse appears in classical profile as the woman holding the lamp, leaning out of the window from the right into the center. And Dora actually physically participated in the painting in the details of the back of the horse with a cross hatching. She added those marks herself. Close to the end, she helped Picasso by painting that detail. Now here's where we come to our side of the Atlantic. Now, among the great champions of the arts who kept the power of Picasso's art alive for the benefit of their community was the woman on the left, Marion Kugler-McNay. And she was born in Ohio in 1883. She's actually almost Picasso's exact contemporary. She was just 2 years younger than he. She was the only child of a physician who worked for the Santa Fe Railroad.